This is an interesting challenge for me because you all come from diverse backgrounds, you have a variety of interests, and so the question is, what could I talk about that might give you a little bit of a flavor for what Royal Roads is like, a little bit of a hint of some of the course material, and some of the concepts that you might possibly get exposed to. Now, obviously, I'm engaged in one particular field or discipline, and so it might be a little bit different from what your areas of interest are. But I thought my life experience may be of greater interest to you, especially since you're looking at enriching your knowledge base, expanding some of your learning. So I thought I might begin by talking a little bit about my background, rather than entrust Tim to that challenge, because you never know what he's going to say about my background. It's interesting because in my previous capacity, I was president and CEO of Provincial Crown Corporation, Tourism British Columbia, and I was frequently invited to talk to students who are partway through their courses or they're in graduating classes. And they were always asking me to talk about your career and what's a career like, and tell us about a career path and what might that be for the field that I'm endeavoring to embark upon. And I always said, well, there's no such thing as a career path. All it is a whole bunch of switchbacks. And you know, you go forward 2 steps, you go back 3, you go up a step, you go down 2, you go forward another 5. And so life is really a whole mixture of different experiences. Perhaps my background's indicative of that. I am what I would call a classically trained marketing person. A long time ago, gosh, 3.5 decades ago, I was a student at UBC, did an undergraduate degree in commerce, a Bachelor of Commerce, specializing in marketing. Then I worked for a year, went back and did a master's degree in marketing and MBA, and then moved to Toronto and started my formal working life. And while I was in Toronto, I felt that it would help if I were to enrich my knowledge base and do a professional certification. And that program was a 3-year program. It was offered to individuals who were working in the marketing community or working for advertising agencies. It's a professional certification program that focused in on sort of fundamentals of marketing, communications, leadership, business planning, strategic planning, and then the final year was actually running advertising agencies and what would be involved in running a large ad agency. It was a really interesting course. The only problem is you did it in your spare time, and of course nobody had any spare time, and so I work all day. And often work on the weekends in my job because it's a very demanding job. I worked for it was the largest ad agency in the country, and I worked on big pieces of business. So I was working on Lever Detergents, Sara Lee, Harvey Wood, CN Tower, and the clients are all demanding, 110%, and so you're trying to meet the needs of your clients, look after your responsibilities in your business, and then go to class. So class would be Thursday nights for 4 hours, and then all day Saturday. And then you have to do your reading and your course material and your papers and so on. And I found it a very challenging experience. It took a lot of energy and a lot of effort. But when I finished, I ended up with a body of knowledge that I would not otherwise have achieved. The other thing that was interesting is I met other people who were in similar types of endeavors. People were working in the marketing community or in advertising industry community. And we had this commonality so we could share our thoughts and our experiences. And so then I went on, I did all kinds of other things, including owned and operated a couple of my own businesses. I worked for large seafood companies on brands, Cloverleaf products, which some of you might recognize. Sold my business, then worked for Labatt's, running wineries, got involved in the Calgary Olympics, and then changed everything and came and worked for the province of British Columbia. And initially in the seafood marketing area, then I worked in the food area, and then from there ended up getting involved in tourism. Tourism's been my sort of mainstream discipline, which lasted probably 16 years, if I think back how long I was involved in tourism. Ended up as president and CEO of Tourism British Columbia, and in sort of that time frame, oversaw the expenditure of about $475 million in marketing, together with another $50 million on top of it, so there's $500 million. But then we influenced the work of colleague organizations And they probably spent another $300 or $400 million in that time period. So looks like I was responsible for about probably close to $1 billion worth of marketing expenditures. In the process, I watched this fascinating evolution of marketing, starting in my early days, which was in the early 1970s in Toronto, on through to most recently the work that Tourism British Columbia was doing in building strategic plans for which the Olympics was probably the single biggest undertaking that they'd ever engaged in. And so we were very, very much involved as an organization. And I observed how technology over those years has had a fundamental shift in the power in the distribution channel. And so I thought, maybe that's a topic I should talk to you about and give you a little bit of a feel for how power moves up and down the distribution channel. And when I'm talking about a distribution channel, I've got some schematics I can show you. What I'm talking about is a supplier and a customer. And eventually, ultimately, all they're interested in doing is a transaction. Supplier goes to the customer and says, have I got the best product for you? They negotiate, they do a transaction. It's usually a monetary transaction. The product exchange takes place, and the transaction's finished. And over the last 1,000 years or so, there's been a massive shift and change in how that happens. And most recently, it's been accelerated because of technology. And so that's what I'm going to give you a little bit of a feel for today. And what I'd like to also suggest is, if you're not interested, that's fine. If you are interested, feel free to ask questions. I'll probably talk quickly because that's one of my weaknesses as a public speaker. Yeah. The other word of warning here is Ray Freeman is in the course, and he's almost finished. He knows way more about technology than I do. So I'm kind of, skating on thin ice here. I know a bit about the concept. So I'm going to show you kind of how the concepts and the theory, as Tim was talking about, will interface with the real world. And the opportunity to bring my sort of conceptual thinking and my experiences into the real world. And by all means, feel free to add to my thoughts, interrupt, challenge, question. And if you'd prefer to do it afterwards, I'll hang around afterwards and we can have a nice private conversation afterwards with anybody who is interested. So, yes.
If you could use the microphone so that we could have a record of all the challenging questions we posed to Rod, and maybe that way we could negotiate his payments for this.
Yeah, actually, the first thing I did was, I was invited to give a lecture here about probably 2 years ago. And I'm about 3 years from normal retirement age. And the people in the class said to me, well, what are you going to do when you finally pack it in? And I just joked. I said, well, I'm going to become an adjunct professor at Royal Roads University. I was kind of fooling around. And the dean of the school was there, along with some of the instructors, and their eyes lit up, and they thought, oh, this would be kind of fun. And then my life changed more rapidly than I thought. And next thing you know, I end up getting a call from a couple of the professors in the school, and they said, we'd like you to come and help out and teach in one of the courses. So that's when I met Ray. I was kind of filling in and assisting one of the professors. And then in January, they said, we'd like to make you an adjunct professor. And I said, well, what's an adjunct professor? And they kind of, they talked all over and do all this stuff and have fun and everything. So then I went home and I said to my wife, they're interested in making me an adjunct professor. I have no idea what that is. So she said, well, Google it. And oh yeah, like I'm not a Google guy, right? So okay, I'll Google it. So I Google it, and there's a long sort of list of definitions. So you've got full professor, associate professor, professor emeritus, and all the way down the list. And sort of near the bottom is adjunct professor. So I read it out to my wife, and I said, it says I work for free. And she was right, I'm working for free. I'm doing a lot of stuff and I'm having fun, but basically it's not got a monetary attachment to it. And so tonight is kind of evidence of me just having fun and meeting people and sharing some of my experiences with people. So that's the first definition, adjunct professor. We'll come back and we'll give you a test afterwards and you can tell me, well, that's a guy who works for free, for whatever reason. So the structure of my conversation is technology and tourism, because tourism is the field that I was most engaged in. And I'm going to run through just a few definitions to give you a little feel for what it's about. But essentially the whole structure of the talk is about how it has seen an evolution or a shifting of power in that distribution channel. From what was in the infancy, thousands of years ago, power sits with the seller and the buyer, and it was basically a negotiated transaction. And then how that power has moved up and down in terms of the distribution channel. But it's moved from what was sellers and distributors to individual consumers. And it's happened in a massive way, basically in about the last 10 to 15 years. And it's all because of technology. So if you look at the structure of the talk, I'm going to start, as I said earlier, with just a few definitions. I'd like to kind of go back into the history of marketing and how it's evolved, and then give you a sense of the emergence of the distribution channel of suppliers, wholesalers, distributors, retailers, and then finally how they meet consumers and what that would look like. The next thing I'd like to do is talk about the impacts this has had on the effects on business organization, because businesses are getting organized in entirely different ways, and it has been accelerated by the impact of technology. And the organizational models that are being employed by organizations that are really truly capitalizing on technology have completely changed. They're really, really different. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about the business enterprise. If you boil it all down, all business enterprises, either for-profit or not-for-profit enterprises, are engaged in an exchange. One individual will exchange a service or a product to another individual in return for something. And so it's really an exchange. If you think about the role of marketing, and you look at the classic historic definitions of marketing, back when I was studying marketing in graduate school, it would be something along these lines. Marketing is all steps in the process of moving goods and services from suppliers to consumers. In the case of tourism, you move the consumers to the suppliers of those goods. And it has as its purpose fulfilling consumer wants and needs. So that's kind of a classic definition. Then it's been enhanced over the years by recognizing that there's a profit motive for the for-profit enterprises, because without profit, then you don't have a return on capital. Without capital, you don't have sufficient investment, and you need the investment to be able to start producing those products. But if you boil it all down, marketing is really accelerating the flow of goods and services. It's kind of like, you know how they did that particle accelerator in CERN and in the Big Hadron Collider, and they've managed to move protons at close to the speed of light. And I gather it's been they've got an environment that's so cold that it's almost as cold as the universe, and they're having these little particles collide. I'm still trying to figure out what the Higgs boson is all about, because physics is beyond my capacity to comprehend, but I gather it's going to have an effect. So in a marketing sense, that's really all we're doing. We're accelerating the flow and increasing the efficiency in the ways in which one would accelerate that flow of goods and services. So if you take a look at basically kind of the stages of how marketing unfolded over the years, and it unfolded going back in the early days from what is central markets to Grand Bazaars, where those central markets become larger and you see more products and services being merchandised, into the effect that first printed message had that Gutenberg came up with. And then actually in 1480, when a fellow by the name of William Caxton posted what's called a sequus bill on the doors of the churches in England, the first printed English message came out. And this is basically what it said. If it please any man, spiritual or temporal, to buy any piece of 2 or 3 commemorations of Salisbury use, let them come to Westminster, and he shall have them good cheap. So there's the first English printed message. So you kind of go, I wonder what in the world this means. Well, basically it was rules for the clergy at Easter for what they should go through and the practices they should follow. And it ended with the message, Supplico set sedula, which meant, please do not tear down. So if you think about it in our terms, it's no different than advertising messages that appear whether it's in television or printed messages or other forms. The problem, though, is as soon as Gutenberg did this, he allowed for the creation of mass communication. And what it did was it stretched the relationship between sellers and suppliers. So it started to complicate how the process of marketing and merchandising would take place. The process became more complex with the advent of mass newsprint, because then you could have mass advertising messages. And this is in the days when you'd see people who would be marketing Dr. Shoop's restorative that will cure all ails, regardless of what they were. And essentially it was alcohol in a bottle, because they're getting around other reasons for why people shouldn't be consuming alcohol. But in those early days of mass distribution, a manufacturer or supplier could produce a single message and then broadcast that message through the print media to a much bigger prospective audience, with hope that that audience would say, I'm really interested in what that product is, and so I would like to actually purchase that product. Then with the advent of magazines, particularly in a mass sense, and it started in about the 1860s and 1870s, with magazines like Ladies' Home Journal or McClure's magazine, they were able to start to merchandise to individuals who were distributed throughout a larger audience. And this audience might be in Europe, it could be in North America, and reach the prospective audience through suddenly color and beautiful images. So it started to influence how people would want to select certain products for their benefit. And then of course in the 1920s, radio became a mass distribution tool, and you had the emergence of what were called soaps, like soap operas. And the reason for soaps was you wanted to entertain your listening audience. And the people who created the soap message were actually the advertisers. So this would be Lever Detergents on behalf of Sunlight Soap would create a sitcom. And the sitcom would be an ongoing entertainment vehicle, things like that we would call a sitcom. So it started in radio and it morphed into television. And then television would have the Colgate 100 hour. Colgate 100 being a mouthwash, and they'd end up with Art Linkletter and the Gardol Shield of Protection. Only people my age know what I'm talking about here. They go, be like a plexiglass, right, to prove how great Colgate dentifrice was. So the whole thing started to change, and they got involved in broadcast messages. And the reason they called it broadcast was it was like a shotgun. You've got all these customers scattered throughout North America. You have a message that you would like to convey. You would shoot that message out through television or through radio, and you would hope that one or two or maybe three customers would say, I really like that, and I'd like to buy Fab laundry detergent or Sunlight laundry detergent. So you're reaching out to those customers, and what you're trying to do is overcome the disintermediation that had taken place because of the advent of the printed message. Then it was the verbal message, and then it became the visual message through the power of television, because it had that power of sight and sound and mass reach and so on. So if we take a look at this in kind of a schematic sense, I would call the first stage direct selling. This is where the person who is producing those products has the ability to reach out to an individual consumer and say, hey, I'd like you to buy my product. And it's no different than if you're walking around the night markets in Chiang Mai and somebody says, hey, come on in, buy my products, have a look at what I have to offer. I've got a great watch here. Matter of fact, I've got 35 great watches here, and you can buy these for $150. Of course, they're only $5 worth for these watches. So you would begin the negotiations. So this goes back into history, and it was really direct selling. Those distribution channel activities involve producers and consumers. Producers would be individual suppliers, and they would then, in many cases, be the sellers themselves, because they carry their merchandise to the market. In other cases, they might rely on sellers who were in those markets, and they would make all the connections with the individual consumers. So the question then was, what happened next in this distribution channel? And that would be what we would call stage 2. And this was the advent of a mass marketplace. And the mass marketplace was what would be called the Grand Bazaar. So I don't know if any of you have had the fun of going through the Grand Bazaar in Istanbul, or you've been in Morocco and you've seen what it's like. But the beauty of the Grand Bazaar was you had the same sellers in the same location, who were selling similar merchandise. So you'd have the rug merchant, or you'd have people selling clothing or other products. So then those suppliers would supply the sellers, and the consumers would come into that mass market. But those suppliers, who would be these folks, would be entirely dependent upon the sellers because they would lose their connection with the consumer. So they had to somehow convince the sellers, who have their stalls or their booths or their shops in the Grand Bazaar, to learn about their product and then entrust in them that they would be communicating and persuading the purchasers to buy these products. So suddenly the power has gone from suppliers talking directly to consumers, and the power now sits with the sellers in the Grand Bazaar. So that was the next shift that took place, and of course it took place eons ago. Stage 3 then was the emergence of what we would call multiple retailers. Multiple retailers involved all kinds of sellers, and the sellers then had control in the distribution, distribution channel. So these suppliers then, in many cases, were selling undifferentiated products. Soap was soap, toothpaste was toothpaste, and they were entirely reliant on the retailers to make a connection with the customer. And so the retailers could then dictate what price they were going to purchase the product for, and then determine what price they were going to sell those same products for when they were making the connections that they needed to make with the consumers. So it became really, really complex, particularly in North America and in Northern Europe, because there were so many sellers or so many retailers and so many sellers, and they were selling undifferentiated products. There's no way of controlling what they were selling. So this was when you suddenly saw the emergence of brands. Brands like Ivory Soap, Sunlight Laundry Detergent, Palmolive Bar Soap, and of course Fab Laundry Detergent. So what they wanted to do was distinguish their products from that of their competitive products. So in the 1860s, it really started with corporations like Procter & Gamble, who are the manufacturers of Ivory Soap. And they recognized that in selling soap products to the troops during the American Civil War, if they put a brand on the outside of the wooden boxes that was selling undifferentiated soap products, then the troops would recognize Ivory Soap. And they'd say, I want Ivory Soap. Second thing they had to do was they had to characterize the soap product. And in those days, soap was made with fat and lye burns your skin. So Ivory said, we'll come up with a product differentiation, distinguishing it in the minds of the consumers. And they would say, we have a product that is 99 and 44 100% pure. So you have to ask, well, what does that mean? And they said, well, it contains no lye, and it won't harm your skin. But nobody knows what purity means. But the way they proved it, it's called claim support, is they said, well, we know it because it floats. So remember the bar soap you throw in the bathtub, it would float. Well, that was an accident of manufacturing. They had no idea how it happened or why, but some swift marketer said, hey, this will be our claim support, and we'll distinguish our product in that way. The same thing actually happened with Palmolive soap. The story behind Palmolive soap was in about 1914 or 1915. There was a copywriter by the name of Claude Hopkins. And Claude Hopkins had an invitation to come to it was a soap company, to sell a certain product. And when he went to that soap company, he thought, oh, that product has no potential whatsoever. But you've got this other product here that I'm kind of curious about. What is it? Oh, well, it's a bar soap. Well, how's it made? It's made with the oil of palm trees and olive oil. So it's made with two oils. So he said, I've got the perfect idea. Palm olive. Let's call it palm olive bar soap. And then we can prove that we have the softest product because it contains no lye, and it's made from palm oil and olive oil. So what this did was it gave them the opportunity to say to these consumers, ask for our product by name. So suddenly the power in the distribution channel went from the retailers to the suppliers, because these people, the consumers, were saying, I want Ivory, I want Palmolive. And as a matter of fact, probably the best testimonial is for Fab Laundry Detergent. In the head office of Colgate-Palmolive in Park Avenue in New York City is a testimonial saying, what a great product this Fab is. I love it. It cleans clothes well. I'm so proud of it. Signed, Abraham Lincoln. So you've got somebody like Abraham Lincoln believing in the product and asking for it by name. So you can see how the power is starting to shift in that distribution channel. And this gives you a little sense of the emergence of branding and brand strategies. Procter & Gamble, Colgate levers started to emerge with their branded products in the 1880s. We saw the emergence of soaps and soap operas on radio. And then a guy by the name of Rosser Reeves in the 1930s, who was an ad guy in New York City, came up with this acronym USP, Unique Selling Proposition. And he said to those same suppliers, you need to come up with a unique selling proposition because all advertising is salesmanship in print. Of course, in the 1920s, print was the dominant media vehicle, newspapers and magazines. So he came up with that first adage of USP. Then in the 1960s, there were a couple guys by the name of Jack Trout and Al Rees, who came up with product positioning. And it's used often in the lexicon of marketing is product positioning. What's your product positioning strategy? So what he said was, in the minds of consumers, it's like they have ladders in their brain. And the ladders are for a category of products. So it could be automobile products, it could be soap products, entertainment products. So what you need to do as a marketer is to have a dominant rung on that ladder, and it could be the ladder of soap products, such that you end up getting people to buy your product because it's top of mind or it has dominant share of mind. And there's research techniques for testing that type of thing. So this showed kind of the evolution of these products. So I've got a little test for you. My test is, do you recognize any of these marks? What's that one up there? Okay, how about this guy? And this one? You know this one? That's the Runaway brand. How about this one? Chevy, yeah, and this one? Okay. So interestingly, this is now an Indian company. I should have put Volvo up, because Volvo is now a Chinese company. But regardless of where they're being manufactured, because I think the last 10 years or so, Jags are being produced in South Africa. The interesting thing is the brand identity has dominated. And people are still going to see Volvo as a safe vehicle because they managed to create a unique rung on that ladder with their product positioning strategy going back to the 1960s. So it had a tremendous amount of power. In the world of tourism, there's a whole bunch of destination brands. So have you seen this brand here? What do you think of it? Are you being facetious? I hate it. It's terrible. It's awful. It's an embarrassment. As a Canadian, we do not brag about being the best place on earth. And it's political. Yeah, pineapple, yeah. Yeah, the imagery, I think, is the craps as well, but that's my professional opinion. I like this one down here. Supernatural, British Columbia. Trees, mountains, and water. This is what BC is all about. Any idea what this is? Costa Rica? Yeah, no artificial ingredients. Yeah, it's more like a food product positioning strategy. It's kind of an odd one for me. You can understand how it makes sense for Costa Rica, but it is kind of a peculiar one. I'll show you one in half a second. What's this, El Salvador? I think those are bullet holes, actually. Or England, can you make this out? Yeah, that one stands out, actually. And maybe anybody with kind of a British background, you recognize what a rose is all about. So here's the next category. This one's a little hard to make out. Do you know what that is? Close. It's a fern. Yeah, from New Zealand. Yeah, New Zealand is a country of approximately the same size as British Columbia. And they've done a fabulous job of creating a brand identity for the entire country and all the products, right? Because they talk about being 100% pure. It's back to that old ivory thing, what's pure? But they've basically inculcated a whole value system in everything that New Zealand does. And it's really come across really, really well. Tourism British Columbia is a corporate logo, of course, have adopted the trees, mountains, and water. Tourism makes, what's that say, NC? You know where that is? Where's NC? Hey, that's good. I think that's what it is anyways. Here's the tourism company, Puerto Rico. Can you make this one out? Yeah. Okay. This guy's a sleeper here. He knows what's going on. You know the brands and the brand identities. So let's go back to the distribution channel and some of those activities. So let's move on to stage 4 in the distributors, because you've seen how brands can influence and move power back and forth in this distribution channel. So now we're going to move on to stage 4. And this is what I call the ugly stage. And this ugly stage was where we saw the emergence of distributors who took power in the distribution channel because they would dominate what was being supplied to these retailers. So when these poor consumers were trying to buy a product, the decisions were all made by these distributors. But it got even uglier. And the way it got uglier was moving on to the next stage of the distribution channel. And this is where the distributors then took over the retailers. And it started happening, in my personal experience, in the early 1970s. The best evidence of that was in Ontario, and it was with Loblaw stores. And they had these TV commercials, and there was this guy, William Shatner, remember him? He'd go up and down the aisles, and he'd go, by gosh, the price is right. And what he was doing was he was doing the advertising for Loblaws. And Loblaws was an integrated distributor retailer chain. They did an incredible job. They were very, very successful. And you saw the emergence out of it of things like generic yellow products, President's Choice, Dave Nickel. But what they didn't do was they weren't nice to the suppliers. And even though the suppliers had powerful brands, they went through and they said, we're only going to take the top-selling branded product. And if you want to sell a new product to us, you're going to have to pay a listing allowance. Well, how much is a listing allowance? $100,000. Well, what do I get with a listing allowance? We'll put it on our shelf for how long? Maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Well, then what happens? Well, if it sells, we'll keep it. If it doesn't, it's gone. Well, what else do I have to do? Well, you have to buy some promotions and end-aisle displays and shelf talkers. And it went on and on and on. So the reason I say this is the ugly phase is I was one of the partners in a fruit snack company. You know those dried fruit snacks you see in the supermarket? We were the originators of that product, commercially produced. But it was a sweat equity company. It's me and my 2 partners and working in the back, and I'm doing the marketing and everything. So then you go to Loblaws, and they demand $100,000. How are you ever going to survive when they demand $100,000 from you? So those poor consumers were totally reliant on these distributors, and the suppliers were almost bankrupted. Unless you were a large, multinational, vertically integrated corporation, it was very hard to do business. So that was the bad news phase. The good news phase is moving on to the next stage, and this is where technology takes all power. And this is where technology just intermediates everything that was in the middle, and you have people connecting directly backwards and forwards. So that's where you see the emergence of things like Amazon, PayPal emerged. You're seeing social networks, viral marketing and media. A whole different world of marketing has emerged, and really basically over the last few years. So the big question is, how has technology impacted all of these different groups? Let's take a quick look at technology. 6.5 billion people or 6.7 billion people live on the face of the earth. There are 4.5 billion cell phones floating around. And probably the most discordant image I ever saw was in 1999 on my first trip to China. And in those days, there's still, masses of bicycles going up and down the street. And I took a photograph. I should have actually put it in my PowerPoint. I hadn't quite figured out how to do that. They had all these bikes and people walking down the sidewalk beside the bikes, and they're all talking on their cell phones. And the beauty of cell phones is you don't have to have landlines or anything. And so the distribution of cell phones was ubiquitous and it was rapid. The next exposure I had was a few years later. I'm riding on the subway in Tokyo, and somebody has their cell phone. And they keep looking at their cell phone. And I finally turned to one of our staff members in the Tokyo office, and I said, what's that person doing? He said, oh, she's doing her email. And I go, email? On her cell phone? What are you talking about? Of course, here we're at, I think we're at 1.5G. and Asia was at 2 or 2.5 generation technology. So I hadn't yet seen it firsthand, but when I was in Japan, I saw it firsthand. And that's also when I started to see netbooks, little tiny, and I actually had a Toshiba way before. So if you go to a Future Shop, you're going to pick them up at Costco, $250. The beauty is they have Wi-Fi built in, webcams built in, and they have all the power to do basically whatever you want to do. They're incredible tools. So you take inexpensive and ubiquitous technology and wireless access almost anywhere. And I actually had my iPod Touch out while Tim was talking. I was trying to see if I can get into the web. I couldn't get into the web for some reason. I'm not that adept yet. But suddenly the whole world has shifted, and it's gone from the old days of technology being used to gather information, record keeping, you know, the old punch cards with IBM and so on, to processing data and mainframes, and then transmitting information. As a matter of fact, Tourism British Columbia in 1994 was the first tourism destination marketing organization in North America to have a website. And that's because the Commonwealth Games are happening here in Victoria. And a research scientist from Simon Fraser University came and talked to us about this thing called the web and what you could do with it, and how you should have a website. So that's what Tourism British Columbia did. So it went from the early web to what's happened now as a two-way flow of communication, flowing it backwards and forward really rapidly. So the good news and the bad news. The bad news is disintermediation. It's all split up all over the place. Mass fragmentation. Way back when I started my marketing career, you could go in and do a classic buy of television or radio or print. And you have this thing called a GRP, a gross rating point. So that's reach and frequency. How many people are you going to reach and how frequently? And you could do a costing on that, and you could do a buy. And we had all kinds of sophisticated mathematical models for stuff for awareness levels and everything. It's all irrelevant now. Because anybody who does a mass media buy, I think, is wasting their money. Unless they have $40 million to spend, like the BC government did over the Olympics. Did you guys see those ads on TV if you're watching the Olympic Games? It had Steve Nash and Sarah McLachlan and so on. They overbought so much that you didn't need to do that. And the fatigue factor was so intense that I'm looking forward to seeing the research on how upset people got after watching it over and over and over again. Even though we're proud of those individuals, and we love the images, albeit people said it's called a green screen. They did a lousy job of producing a green screen. What's happened is with mass fragmentation, people are watching television, they've got their netbook in front of them, and then they've got a computer going, and they also have a PVR going. So they're bouncing all over the place, and their eyes are going everywhere. The ability to do a single-minded strategic buy has been compromised by this prevalence of different tools to reach different audiences. So the whole power in the distribution channel now has completely shifted. It's almost what I call back to the past. It creates that opportunity that I talked about at the beginning of an individual seller talking to an individual customer and negotiating directly, understanding what that customer wants, and then delivering either the message or the product to meet whatever their needs are in so doing. Probably the most entertaining thing is to see how mass media has shifted the power to individuals because of blogging. And if they wanted to do blogging, they can completely destroy a product almost overnight. And the reason for it is the emergence of YouTube. Interestingly, YouTube came out of three characters who they were actually the originators of PayPal. They made a bunch of money out of PayPal, and then they said, hey, we got a great idea. Let's come up with this opportunity for individuals to share their images on a hosted site called YouTube. But they couldn't get anybody to host the sites. They started with one of the originators, and he was at the zoo, and he had an image of an elephant, and it was called a pachyderm. And he said, look how easy it is. You could create a 1 minute, a 2 minute, a 5 minute little video vignette of here I am at the zoo. And people couldn't care less. It was a giant yawn. So then they had a contest, and in the contest they said, we'd like to get young women to post 10 little video vignettes of what's exciting and interesting and attractive. Well, nobody could be bothered. So they had no uptake. It was kind of a dormant media vehicle. And then somebody figured out if you take Mentos, those mints, and you put it together with Diet Coke, it will become like a rocket and it will take off. And as soon as they did that and they posted it on YouTube, everything went crazy. And everybody started flooding to YouTube. And so suddenly what you see is these individuals in downtown Victoria with their cell phone filming the police kicking a guy on the street. And then they post it on YouTube, and suddenly the whole, you could call it vigilante communications or communications, basically the whole landscape has changed. The other thing that's changed is if you put an image on YouTube, it's archived forever. So you can go back and see that Mentos-Coke combination, or you could see how Chevy, I showed you the Chevy image, they tried to launch Tahoe. So they did on Donald Trump and his celebrity apprentice program, they had the apprentices produce their own commercials for Chevy Tahoe. And they thought they did a wonderful job because they put whatever you needed to produce your own commercial. So people go onto the website, they could cut and paste and glue and add images and music and whatever. And it really worked incredibly well until some people started blogging. And then they started creating their own images on YouTube. And they were starting to ridicule it because Chevy Tahoe with their big vehicles and, in this day and age of environmental sustainability and sensible practices, they started to parody what Tahoe did. And it became recorded and archived almost permanently. So there's the double-edged sword of what technology is doing and the power of disintermediation. The next best thing was blogging. Procter & Gamble, they produce Pampers. They decided they'll come out with new Pampers, 30% smaller and 30% more absorbent. So it's 30% more comfortable. Fantastic. But it leaked 30% more. So they had pissed off customers because they're leaking. And the blogging was all the mothers who were angry and hostile. And they didn't tell anybody they were going to do this. They did a switch. Remember that Coke Classic switch they did on everybody? It's gone down in history as the worst marketing move ever. And I found it kind of fun because a friend of mine was president of Pepsi in those days, so I'd see Clive on TV all the time, busy denigrating the competition for what they did. But because of technology, everything has happened so rapidly, and power has now moved back into the hands of the individual consumer. So we've gone from mass retail, specialized retail, all the way down into what is now a customer-centric operating environment. And mass competition is now happening on a global scale with severe brand fragmentation. So the challenge is this disconnect between sellers and service providers, especially in the tourism industry, makes it very, very challenging because you have vigilante communications taking place and an inability for operators to identify what is the most effective way of allocating their scarce resources. The classic definition of economics is the efficient allocation of scarce resources among alternative applications to produce an intended outcome. You'll remember that forever because I just said it. It'll go on YouTube, so it'll be archived. So that's all strategy is about, is you've got so much money, so much time, what do we do with it amongst all these opportunities? But it's a very complex operating environment, especially for consumer products. If you think about a consumer product, it's usually bought sight unseen from a distance. It's a big ticket item, and it usually involves 4 days, 5 days, 10 days worth of travel, and you don't know what you're going to get. And you're not buying a single product where you can touch it, taste it, feel it. You're buying a series of experiences, some good, some bad. So the beauty of technology is you can plan it out in advance. And if you have honest web presence, you've got honest communication with your customers, delivered in a way that those customers really want. And there's a technique in marketing called curricula-based marketing, which I won't show you tonight, but it's basically building a rapport with your customers and then communicating with those customers the right information at the right time to the right individuals, sequentially over time. So in the tourism industry, it's a very powerful tool because it helps them mitigate risk, because you don't want to spend $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 on your trip and then find it was an awful experience. And if you look at most of the web presence for Tourism North Carolina or Puerto Rico or other jurisdictions, they're producing what's called electronic brochures. It's still a brochure, but it's static. And they haven't updated it. Some cases months and months on end, or maybe years on end. And it's dormant historic information. So you need something that is immediate, it's lively, it's current, and it's accurate. And it's honest, which is the most important thing of all. So how do you do it? Here's the schematic. I won't get into this, but this is the start point of a destination management system. The next thing is called the Marketing Intelligence Platform, and that's where you take all the content that sits in this central server, and you take all the input information, and you flow it through different distribution channels. But you bundle it and package it in such a way that the consumers get only what they want to get. Because research that was done by Tourism British Columbia said people will spend about 15 or 20 seconds on a home page. And if they don't like it, they leave where you're going. They really want to get right down to the information they're looking for. So if they're golfers, they want golfing, skiers, skiing, outdoor adventures, and so on. So this has completely shifted the world of marketing, especially in the context of global competition, especially for tourism dollars, shifting economic powers. We're seeing the emergence of the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. They're controlling much more of the capital base that's invested, and around the world, increasing government debt, especially what's happening in Greece at this point in time. And then, of course, aging populations. And ironically, aging populations are spending more time on the web and more time using social networking and social media to determine what they'd like to do because they've got more time on their hands. So they're getting more technologically adept. So this prevalence of technology is having a very big impact, not only on consumers of the future, who we know are technology-driven, they have short attention spans, they're looking for immediate gratification, and they're looking to non-traditional information sources. They're no longer trusting that message that was delivered as a broadcast message. They're looking at all kinds of other organizations for information. So to survive in this environment, leadership, entrepreneurialism, and marketing is absolutely critical. And the emergence of strategic alliances is what's going to distinguish the organizations of the future. And the old school organizations aren't going to survive. The prevalence of what would be called virtual organizations is massive. And I'm seeing more and more of that in my own personal life as I talk to individuals who are keen on getting myself and our colleagues engaged in a variety of different enterprises. So the big question is, how will organizations survive in this kind of an environment? If you get involved in some of the strategy courses, you're going to hear from Michael Porter. He, a number of years ago, wrote Wealth of Nations, and it was very, very pivotal. He's also written books on strategy. And obviously, I won't get into it here, but his books on strategy resonate with some of the leading edge marketing that's taking place. And he talks about fit. And strategy is more than what I said earlier, Ross or Reeves and a unique selling proposition, or Trout and Rees who are talking about product positioning. It's how do you get a fit at all stages of that distribution channel. And so it's the supply chain and the fit of everything that's going on in the supply chain that will create enduring points of difference such that you can maintain your strategic power. And that power then for organizations will endure, and it will give them that leg up in terms of where they're going to go. I'll skip some of the three types of fit. So what does this mean for the tourism industry, especially in British Columbia? Tourism British Columbia has been responsible for marketing the unique physical assets. And that's why the branding, Super Natural British Columbia, is so important. Because it's not just the environment, excuse me, the trees, mountains, and water, it's the human landscape. And the reason I take umbrage with the best place on earth is all that does is offend anybody who is coming from anywhere else other than British Columbia. And it runs completely contradictory to super natural British Columbia and what the province is known for and what Canadians are known for. So the challenge for British Columbia, and one of its competitive strengths, was that network, the virtual and the real human network of all of the organizations who helped contribute to the close to $1 billion worth of expenditure that I was engaged in, so that we can continue to go forward. However, we're in an environment of continual change. The employees that will be engaged in these organizations are technology-driven, they're searching for meaning, and they are achievement-oriented. They're looking for a culture that engages them with a climate of respect or a values-based culture. They're also looking at shared responsibilities, and these were some of the tricks that Tourism British Columbia used to engage the talent in the organization, because the talent resides in all of those individuals. And as you go through furthering your knowledge base and your education, you're going to find that that talent will help organizations that you will be involved in, such that you can then contribute to the organizations. The secrets that Tourism British Columbia had in terms of building its unique competitive advantage was starting by attracting talent. Then that talent is like critical mass, it attracts more talent. Then equipping them with necessary resources, protecting the individuals so they can go ahead and do their jobs, and then empowering them to do what they are best at doing. And Tourism BC was a very good example of an organization that had people with multiple skill sets in very unique areas, and how they came together was almost like magic in terms of the organization. Take a look at this whole history. We go back to my earlier description of transaction-based marketing. The world of marketing has gotten way more complex, and it's way more challenging to figure out, as an organization, where do we deploy our scarce resources? Back to that definition of economics. And how do we make sure that we vest power in the individual consumers and the employees, because they become one and the same thing. Those same consumers happen to be your employees. And how do we allow new business models for networking to emerge in a completely changing operating landscape? The pace of change is going to continue, but the real question of all is, how will this current state of uncertainty, in our case, the tourism industry of British Columbia, and in Canada, lead to a more robust future? Or will we see it atrophy to times in the past? And that's a question for you to wrestle with. And I'm invited to lecture with the students, and I look to people like Ray, what are the answers to this, Ray? I don't know what the answers are. I'm now just an adjunct professor contributing to the thought process. So I hope I've kind of stimulated your thinking, giving you a little bit of fun, kind of the history of marketing here. And with this in mind, I'm just going to bow out and say thank you very much for your attention. And again, I'm more than happy to answer any questions or engage in any lively dialogue if you have any questions you'd like to ask. Thanks very much, everybody. No questions?
Who's going to go first?
I've scared you. So I have to warn you, this has come about through about 35 years of working in various endeavors.
Thank you very much. I don't have a marketing background, so I'm curious about your ideas with that expertise, with the tone of a lot of work being done in social technologies now. It seems as if it's almost a faux pas to be too direct with marketing, as if it's all about relationship building and trust building and sharing of information, and that's embedded in the bigger open source movements with, you know, everything from open source software to consulting to open government. So when a provider of something comes onto one of those platforms, it's really dicey. You know, if they're saying the road's blocked because of a rock slide, that's great. If they're saying join our free webinar on Friday, it's going to be about that, you know, that's okay, you know, but if it's come and buy this, or, you know, you want to do a such and such event, well, we own copyright to that, talk to us, you know, then it's just like a spark for bad feedback. So it seems an interesting paradox with this going back to direct marketing, and yet there's this very egalitarian, slow trust-building environment out there.
You've done an incredible job of describing how complex the landscape has become. The enduring brands that carry an identity, which is why I showed you those logos, will have strength and power. But the way they nurture it has gotten so much more complex, because the indirect approach, especially through things like YouTube, will help enhance the character of the brand experience. But if you're too blunt in saying, come by, a Chevy Tahoe, and people are going, well, wait a minute now, it consumes so much more, fuel and so on. You run into that dichotomy, so it's a very tricky environment. The other challenge, of course, is trying to gauge and measure the effectiveness of what you're doing in communicating, back to my scarce resources situation, through alternate distribution channels, and knowing, am I getting value for money spent? It's very hard to judge that. I'll give you a couple examples. A number of the manufacturers are now producing on YouTube stories that do not say, buy my product. A good example was, I can't remember the name of the company, but it's a guy who makes blenders. And the blenders are $800 a piece. So they're like mega expensive blenders. So he produced commercials in which he'd put the blender out, and then he'd do the blending exercise. But the commercials aren't going through normal broadcast media. They're going onto YouTube and social networks, and he'll put it on other hosted sites. And he would say, okay, I had a bad day on the golf course today, so I'm getting rid of these golf balls. And he'd drop them in the blender, and it'd just crush them. So then he'd say, I'm really upset with my iPod Touch because it's not working, or some other product. He'd drop it in the blender, just destroy it. He'd end up taking big metal objects, and he'd drop it into the blender and just crush them. He'd never say what the blender is, but it was the name of his company, was his name. So he'd come out kind of like Mr. Rogers. He's got his little sweater on, and he'd produce this. Suddenly, he's selling massive amounts of these things at a phenomenal price. And it's because he's doing a very subtle job of demonstrating what an incredibly powerful product this is. So what Tourism British Columbia did around the 2010 Olympic and Paralympic Games was they produced what was called mini docs. And the mini docs were little documentaries, and they were hosted on the site, but then they were posted on Facebook and other social networking sites. And it would involve a variety of people talking about great restaurants or wonderful attractions and things that you can do. So then they went one step further, and they created a contest. And in the Olympic parlance, there's a thing called the aversion effect, where people go, oh, I don't want to go to the Olympic site, I won't be able to get a hotel room, I'll get gouged, too busy. In the skiing world, the ski resorts were really worried about this. And so they said, what's going to happen is people are going to say, I don't want to ski this year in British Columbia because I'll never be able to get anywhere on the mountain and all this type of thing. Well, that was inaccurate. So they had a contest, and the contest was, tell us why you think you could produce the best ski videos. And the contest was 3 years ago. And so everybody went out, and they had shots of themselves skiing. And then they posted the shots on their site, and then they had a camera trained on themselves, and they said, hey, this is why I think I could do the best job. And there was a guy by the name of Chris Wheeler, and he did a great job. So he said, you win the contest, and your job is to spend the entire season skiing all of the resorts of British Columbia. We'll pay for it all. And you produce anything you want, no controls. So you can ski the back bowls, you can do the steep and deep, ski the trees, you can go to the bars, you could sit in the restaurants, you could, whatever you want to do. And we'll post it. And so it wasn't a direct sales message, come and book and get a hotel room for so much or a ski package for so much. It was a way of building an awareness about the ski product. Now this was happening concurrently with a whole series of integrated marketing activities. So the activities would be postings on NBC's site, because NBC were going to be the host broadcasters for the games. There'd be contests for people to win. They used some traditional media vehicles, such as television, which in hindsight I think was a waste of money. And I was unhappy with it, but I was CEO, so I didn't have anything to say about it. So it was up to the market. Remember I said, you got to let the marketing people do their job, so I did. Although occasionally I'd ask questions about, oh, what are we getting for this TV commercial? And so it was these other types of images that were distributed through viral networks that had a much bigger impact. I'd actually be curious what Ray has to say, because he has a marketing background and a technology background. So I don't know, do you want to add some fuel to my observations here?
Yeah, sure. You picked the gentleman on the end of the room. Yeah.
Thanks. How come you don't have Facebook? Well, I don't have time for Facebook. Well, I do have a Facebook account now, And the reason I do, and Twitter, and I'd used LinkedIn for years because that's just a resume online, and yet there's a bunch of tools there. You only need to use what you find is personally applicable to you. But by stretching yourself and experimenting with a few things, you can find that you'll learn a little bit more about how this is happening from other perspectives other than your own. So I started Twitter. I worked for Tourism Vancouver Island last year for a while. And the younger staff on the marketing team were playing with all these social networking things. And I thought, okay, well, I don't really have time because I was commuting up island and doing my destination development courses with Rod and Jeff. But I thought, okay, I'm going to apply this. And I created a Twitter account. And I was kind of a lurker, just sort of see what's going on and sort of figure it out. Well, then what had happened was I'd see things that I'd find interesting and I would sort of retweet them, which is just say, oh, well, that's an interesting article in a newspaper, and I'd share it. Or I'd post some questions and then I'd get these responses and stuff like that. And the cool thing I found about that was that I started getting people following me, and I didn't know why. Why would they follow me? What do I have to say that's interesting? And what I did was I was following things or posting things that I found relevant and interesting to me. And I was starting to make connections. So, I created a sustainable tourism professionals group on LinkedIn. And then I started getting these inquiries from people who are tourism professionals in Hong Kong and India and places like that. And you'd pose a question, what is the meaning of this? Or you'd put a relevant article up because, of course, in graduate studies, you never have an opinion. You pose a question and then you have to refer to the literature and you have to back that up with evidence. And then you get these dynamic conversations going, which is really quite fascinating. So when you looked at the social media stuff, and it was kind of cool when we did destination development residency last end of September, and Rod came in, and he started showing these models, very scary stuff, the big charts there, and explaining it, and it was like we're all trying to follow it. And then what do you do as well? He empowered people that he worked with to take and give them the resources they need. So there was a fellow named William Backer, who's the e-business guru at Tourism BC, and he came in and he was talking about, Rod laid it out for us tonight, but William showed you how to do it, which was really cool, and how they were planning for the Olympics. So this was back in September, and he was showing us the spikes in the visits through Google Analytics and all this stuff. And this is the kind of the cool thing about this is you get this, the theory and the experience from people who've done it in the field, and they share it with you. And then you've got your cohorts, I had people in my classroom from Saskatoon and the Yukon and Newfoundland who are on my team, and we have a fellow right now who's come here from Ethiopia, and there are people who maybe just finished an undergrad degree not too long ago, starting up their masters, and then you've got people who are at retirement age who are starting their masters, and everybody's sharing, and so you've got this amazing melting pot of experiences coming together. So what happens is you get to pick and choose what you need. So when Rod was talking about the strategy that's very integrated and it can be very complex, yeah, that can be a little bit frightening. That can be a little scary because technology can be very intimidating. But through people guiding you and saying, well, have you tried this? Well, I'm not going to try that. I don't have time for that. But at a point, that might become relevant. And you say, well, how do you do this? And then you pose the question on Facebook to your friends. I started my Facebook account 3 days ago, and I've got 25 friends already.
Wow.
And all I did was I just went through Moodle, and I went to the profiles of everybody to get their individual email addresses that were not the Royal Roads ones, because some of them are gone. I mean, I saw them at the first residency, 2 years ago, and I sent them an email, and I said, do you want to be a Facebook friend? And bang, everybody's come back. And it's not just the people that were in my residency, it's people that I've met since then, or people who are the guest speakers that have come in. There's one fellow, his name's Dave Butler, and he worked with Canadian Mountain Holidays. They're based out of Banff. They're one of the leading heli hiking operations in the world, essentially. And he's sort of a guru of sustainability. And when I was taking sustainability, it was like, okay, it goes beyond recycling. It's about marketing. It really is. It's a big part of it, and marketing to people's expectations and the experience they expect. I mean, I can go on for hours about this stuff, but I think what it comes down to is now, I've made a connection with him. And, we're connected through LinkedIn, we're connected through Facebook now. And then what's happened is Heather Knowles, who was in my destination development course, who's one of those youngins who's she's in her late 20s. She's now getting into a mentorship relationship with Dave Butler because that's her interest. And they're making this longer term life connection. It's beyond just professionalism. So that's the cool thing about this experience at Royal Roads.
Yeah, the tricky part is with Twitter, I was asked to talk to a number of the students about my career and so on, and they all had their computers out and they were all tweeting. And so what they're doing is they're posting, 145 characters or something, about what I'm saying. And I never saw what they were posting, but it could be, oh, this is really bad or boring or something. So then I was in Nanaimo last week, I guess it was Wednesday, giving a presentation. And same thing, there are people in the audience and they're tweeting. And so they're sending it out to their connections, what they're thinking about what you're presenting. And then I've subsequently read that paid for public speakers have their laptop up with Twitter so they can see what the people are saying about what they're saying well. And so it's this kind of dynamic interplay with people. But it's kind of ironic because I've returned to my life, which go back 40 years ago or whenever I went to university, and I find it so stimulating. And it's because of all the people, just the way Ray's described it. You've got all these folks, and because things are changing so rapidly, it's not like there's one easy, perfect model, and it doesn't have the sort of the neatness of double entry bookkeeping. It's a particularly dynamic operating environment, and it's the future. It's going to get even more accelerated, and things that we could never envision. It's really an exciting environment. And so the fun is you learn from your colleagues in your cohorts, and then you get exposure to some of the concepts. So I gave you kind of a little bit of the history of how power moves back and forth, and then what's happened now and how it's such a different operating environment for everybody.
I have maybe one more question, and Claire was my classmate when we were doing our Masters in Communication. So this is part of the cohorting.
Thank you. First, I have to say thank you to Mr. Harris, give a great presentation. And well, I had a very long day at work, so I hope I can put my question in a very organized way. I've been doing some research about the ADS, the approved destination status that Canada and the China government still negotiating. But I understand that Canada should soon be approved and have everything go smooth. I would like to hear your insight that, like, once Canada is approved by the China government, how would the tourism BC or the tourism industry in BC can utilize technology to reach this huge market?
That's a very, very good question. First of all, for those of you who are not familiar with ADS, in 1999, there were only 7 countries who were approved by the Chinese government to allow their citizens to travel to on an official tourist visa. And of those countries, they were all in Asia Pacific. There was only one Western country, and that was Australia. And so in 1999, a group of us traveled to China, and we had meetings with the Vice Premier of China and all the senior officials and so on, anticipating that we would be the number 2 Western country to secure approved destination status. The reason it's so important is that one is not permitted to advertise your destination in China without the acceptance of the Chinese government. And there were restrictions on the exchange of money, so it created complications for tour operators who were building packages and bringing visitors to Canada. The difficulty, though, is it took 10 years to secure approved destination status, so it just happened at the end of 2009. Up until that point in time, people were allowed to visit Canada, but it was on kind of a quasi-business trip. And so they would come for 5 days, they would do like a quarter day of work, a meeting, and then the rest of the day they would enjoy a travel experience. The beauty of that was it was usually high-end travelers who were spending more money. So with approved destination status, what it's going to do is it's going to make it available to all approved citizens. To facilitate it, the Canadian government needs to have the capacity to issue the number of visas, and they were always underutilized, so that there was some risk there that they wouldn't be able to do it. It will then create an opportunity for advertising. Now, in China, there are a certain degree of restrictions. As we saw, Google have now exited from China. But the Chinese government is more interested in political issues than they are purely commercial issues. So Tourism British Columbia has a Mandarin language website already, and it is available in Asia Pacific. And it is linked directly into, you know, that kind of diagram I had there? That's the foundation piece, the destination management system. And it's a live linkage. My remark about electronic brochures is most countries will take what would be a brochure, they translate it, they'll put it up on their website, and then it just sits static. That's not what's happening with Tourism British Columbia. So every time new information goes on the site, for example, now there are 18,500 pages of community content on hellobc.com website. There's probably, the target was 65 communities with information. So every time new information is put on, it becomes live. So that information then, through the Mandarin language website, is available in mainland China. I do not believe that the organization will spend any consumer marketing dollars through traditional channels like TV ads or print ads or so on. They may do a little bit of promotion, but again, I can't answer that question because as of midnight last night, Tourism British Columbia doesn't exist anymore. The provincial government took it over, and they've reduced the operating budget from what was about $60 million. It's now about $50 million. And they have forced the organization to adopt the government's web management practices. And so everything's in kind of a state of transition, and we don't know, or I don't know, well, the staff don't know either what will happen or where it will go. And they don't know how the government will decide how much resources, my economics thing, scarce allocation, how much resources will be allocated to the China market. And in light of reducing budgets, and government now have travel restrictions for government, because they're now government bureaucrats. They're restricted in terms of travel. So there are a lot of question marks for how capable the organization will be to do their marketing. They're likely dependent on receptive tour operators to do their business with receptives, and or the overseas staff, because there are staff people who are on contract but based in Beijing and Shanghai. And again, that's a question because they don't know what the government will do, whether they'll cancel all the contracts or not. So beyond that, that's why I say I had a really good question. I don't know the answer to it. I'd love to be able to tell you. I'll give you the orders of magnitude. Annually, British Columbia hosted about 100,000 visitors from mainland China. And the expectation was, with ADS, somewhere between 300 and 400,000 visitors. The likelihood is a lot of those visitors will be what's called group tour bookings. And with group tour, they aren't the lucrative market that we're coming in as the business travelers. And so then they'll negotiate for rock bottom prices. And so it's really hard to say what that may look like in the next little while. If you would like more information, I'm more than happy to put you in contact with the staff who are directly responsible for that. And then you could get linked up, because they do have contract staff in Taipei. They're still engaged in Hong Kong, but no staff members, but very much involved in marketing activities in Hong Kong. Whereas the Canadian Tourism Commission have abandoned the Hong Kong market, which they did about 6 years ago. And just recently, they cut $5 million out of their budget for the Japanese office. So all they have now is 1.5 people. I'm not sure what the half person looks like. And $100,000 to spend, and that's it. So they've basically been curtailed in their capacity to engage in marketing activities. So that's kind of my latest on where Tours BC are at.
Thank you. And thank you all again for coming. That has just been an excellent talk and presentation, and I'm hoping that we have all got something. As a graduate of a communications program, I'm listening to technology shifting power for consumers, but in my research it was political power in Kenya that shifted from the government's hands to us as the public. We had people with cell phones taking pictures of the election results and sending them to back to each other. So when the government announces and says, well, Tim only got 4 votes, then people are saying, oh no, we saw there were 400. What do you mean? So that is an ongoing discussion, and I hope this has whet your appetite. These are the faculty, the adjunct faculty that in economic times are really good for us to have. But the faculty that we have on staff that will help you think about issues that are current, relevant, and applicable to all walks of life, everything we do. And the results, the questions that we ask in academic forums will change our lives. So thank you so much for being a part of our community and being a part of tonight. Have a safe trip home, and we really look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you.